The documentary opens with the muted glow of an old archival reel, its grainy frames unveiling the windswept gardens of the Harrington estate, a place the public once revered as a cornerstone of American dignity, unaware that its marble corridors had echoed with secrets capable of rewriting national history. In those early summer months of 1963, before the scandals, before the committees, before the whispered testimonies were sealed behind redacted pages, there existed a fragile, trembling bond between Senator Jonathan Hale, America's rising symbol of moral reform, and Lady Eleanor Harrington, the last heir of a British royal bloodline, whose presence in Washington had always carried the air of a sacred duty. Both were figures shaped by tradition, bound by legacies heavier than their own wants, yet fate seemed to conspire to pull them into the same orbit. As the documentary narrator speaks, the camera pans across forgotten letters and unclassified memos, hinting at a connection that neither the church nor the crown would have ever approved of. Their first encounter, recorded only in fragments of personal journals, occurred during a diplomatic reception where candlelight flickered against polished silver, and Eleanor stood near the tall windows, the moon brushing her face with a serenity that Jonathan would later describe as an impossible kind of grace. He approached her not as a statesman, but as a weary soul searching for meaning, and she greeted him with that gentle, steady gaze that suggested she understood burdens that were never spoken aloud. From that night onward, tension, quiet, magnetic, dangerous, followed them like a shadow. Though neither crossed the line of propriety, their conversations carried a depth that shook Jonathan's sense of righteousness. His faith demanded restraint, her royal upbringing demanded composure, yet something ungovernable grew between them, something neither scripture nor protocol could smother. The more they resisted, the more the air around them seemed charged, as though the universe itself conspired to test the limits of their vows. As the part concludes, the narrator reminds us that every great scandal begins not with an act, but with a moment, small, unseen, yet powerful enough to alter the course of nations. And for Jonathan and Eleanor, that moment had just begun weaving its silent threads through history, tighter than they realized, darker than anyone was prepared to accept. The second part of the documentary shifts into the dim, wood-paneled interior of the Capitol Library, where the first undeniable crack in Senator Jonathan Hale's rigid self-discipline was said to appear. An evening many believe to be routine, yet the surviving security logs reveal that he and Lady Eleanor Harrington remained inside long past the hour their escorts left. The archival narration describes the atmosphere as thick with unspoken truths, and as the camera glides over the dust-laden shelves and forgotten manuscripts, it becomes impossible not to imagine the weight of that moment pressing down on them. Eleanor, dressed in a modest navy gown that still managed to radiate quiet nobility, stood before a display of ancient legal codes, tracing her gloved fingertips along the glass, as though searching for answers hidden in centuries of precedent. Jonathan entered the room moments later, his tie loosened slightly, his posture heavier than usual, as if burdened by decisions he could no longer articulate. Their eyes met, not with the surprise of chance, but with the inevitability of two souls who had been drifting toward each other despite every warning sign carved into their consciences. A hush fell over the room as they exchanged polite words, though the documentary narrator emphasizes that their voices carried an undercurrent of longing and restraint, so palpable that even decades later, witnesses described it as a storm held behind glass. Eleanor asked him whether he ever felt crushed by the expectations placed upon him. Her question, softened by a tremor that betrayed the emotional conflict she worked so hard to hide. Jonathan, a man shaped by scripture, duty, and a lifetime of public scrutiny, admitted that he prayed nightly for clarity. Yet the more he prayed, the more he sensed that the true test of his faith was not in rejecting worldly temptation, but in understanding why this particular presence, this particular woman, unraveled him so completely. The lighting in the reenacted footage grows darker, more intimate, as Eleanor steps closer, her expression a fragile blend of yearning and fear, and Jonathan instinctively mirrors the movement before catching himself, his hand tightening around the spine of a leather-bound book, as though anchoring himself to reality. The narrator explains that no inappropriate touch occurred that night, no breach of vows. Yet the emotional collision between them had reached a point of no return. When Eleanor finally turned to leave, her voice barely above a whisper as she wished him strength in his battles, Jonathan felt something inside him splinter, an ache both sacred and forbidden, a pull that defied the logic of politics and the rigid walls of his faith. As the library doors closed behind her, the camera lingers on Jonathan's silhouette, a man torn between virtue and desire, between divine calling and human weakness, foreshadowing the scandal that would one day shake the nation and destroy everything both of them had sworn to protect. The third part of the documentary transitions into the golden haze of a late autumn morning at St. Augustine's Chapel, where Jonathan Hale was known to seek refuge whenever the pressures of political life threatened to crush him. Yet on this particular morning, his prayers were shadowed by thoughts he refused to speak aloud. Thoughts shaped like Eleanor Harrington's quiet smile, her poised voice, the calm that radiated from her presence, as though she were both a temptation and a benediction. The reenactment shows Jonathan kneeling in the dim pews, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles pale from the force of his internal war, whispering pleas for strength, forgiveness, guidance, anything that might help him silence the growing certainty that his soul recognized Eleanor in a way that surpassed the boundaries of earthly ties. The narrator describes how, according to his private journal, he believed God was testing him, not with sin, but with a form of affection so profound it threatened to unravel the life he had built upon moral absolutes. At the same hour across the city, Eleanor attended a classified diplomatic meeting at the British Embassy, yet even she seemed distracted, her polished answers drifting into moments of stillness, her gaze lowering with a softness that senior advisors interpreted as exhaustion, unaware that her thoughts spiraled toward Jonathan with a force she dared not admit. Her upbringing had taught her that royal duty was a sacred covenant, an oath carved into bloodlines, yet the more she tried to bury her longing, the more it bloomed inside her like a forbidden prayer, dangerous, luminous, relentless. Later that day, fate intervened in a way neither expected. A sudden security breach at the Capitol forced diplomats and senators into the same restricted corridor, and among the hurried officials, Jonathan and Eleanor found themselves standing only a few steps apart, breaths unsteady from the chaotic lockdown, their eyes locking with a depth that made time momentarily fold in on itself. They spoke in hurried whispers, words laced with vulnerability, Eleanor confessing that she feared losing herself within the roles she had been born to fulfill, Jonathan admitting that he feared losing his ability to follow God's will, that he feared becoming the kind of man who misinterpreted divine purpose for personal desire. Their voices trembled, not from impropriety, but from the unbearable truth that their souls were beginning to move in tandem, two parallel lines bending toward intersection, despite every law that forbade it. The scene builds tension as alarms fade and officials disperse, leaving them briefly alone in the amber-lit hallway, where the silence between them swelled with unspoken confessions neither dared to voice. Eleanor stepped back first, her eyes shining with a sorrowful strength, reminding him that some bonds, no matter how sacred they felt, could ignite ruin if brought into the light of the world. Jonathan nodded, yet the conflict inside him deepened, a spiritual tremor that no sermon could calm. As part 3 ends, the narrator reveals a chilling clue found decades later, a surveillance photograph of that very moment, tucked away in a sealed intelligence file, a photograph that would later become the first piece of evidence suggesting that their connection was not mere rumor, but the spark of a scandal powerful enough to fracture 2 nations and call into question the fragile balance between duty, faith, and forbidden devotion. Part 4 opens in the dim glow of a nearly empty committee chamber, long after the aides and reporters have gone home, leaving only the soft hum of the ventilation system and the scattered documents awaiting tomorrow's hearings. Jonathan Hale sits alone at the polished mahogany table, his reflection stretched across its dark surface, looking as weary and conflicted as the man himself. The narrator explains that according to newly unsealed notes from his chief of staff, Jonathan remained in that room for hours, unable to concentrate on the foreign aid proposals before him because his mind kept replaying the moment in the Capitol corridor. Eleanor's trembling voice, her unwavering grace, the sorrow in her eyes when she stepped away from him, as though she were protecting something far more fragile than her reputation. Across the city, Eleanor retired to her guest suite at the Harrington Embassy residence, but sleep refused to come. She sat by the window wrapped in a shawl, watching the headlights glide along Massachusetts Avenue, her heart caught in a storm of duty, desire, and fear. The documentary narrator reads from her private diary, the one discovered among her sealed belongings decades later, where she admitted that her feelings for Jonathan were a quiet ache that grew sharper with every breath. Yet she begged God to help her restrain it, writing that love could be holy or it could be ruinous, and she no longer knew which path her heart was leading her toward. Meanwhile, Jonathan buried his face in his hands, whispering prayers that cracked at the edges, pleading for divine clarity, for freedom from the longing that felt at once sacred and perilous. Despite his devotion, he could not deny the truth blooming inside him. Eleanor represented not temptation, but a kind of spiritual reflection, someone who mirrored the parts of him he had never been able to share with anyone, not even with his closest allies. The reenactment shows him rising suddenly, pacing the empty room, torn between the man he was expected to be and the man he feared he was becoming. By the time he returned home, the sky was washed with the pale light of dawn, and he found himself staring at his wedding band, feeling guilt cut through him like a blade. Not because he had acted wrongly, but because his heart had begun to drift towards someone who embodied a kind of purity he could neither deny nor fully embrace. Across town, Eleanor finally closed her diary, but her final sentence of the night left historians breathless. If the truth between us ever comes to light, it will not be desire that destroys us, but the world's judgment of something it could never understand. As part 4 ends, the narrator reveals an unearthed audio recording from the following week, classified for over 50 years, in which intelligence officials discuss the emerging emotional vulnerability between the senator and the British noblewoman, marking the first moment their private spiritual conflict became a matter of national surveillance, and setting in motion a chain of events that would soon escalate far beyond either of their control. Part 5 begins with a shift in tone. No longer the calm before the storm, but the first tremor of the scandal that history would later obsess over. The documentary cuts to gray, highly degraded surveillance footage captured by an intelligence unit whose existence was denied for decades. The images show Jonathan Hale entering the Smithsonian's private archive room for a closed-door historical briefing, a routine visit for a senator involved in cultural preservation committees. But what was not routine the narrator explains, was the appearance of Lady Eleanor Harrington exactly 7 minutes later. Her arrival unlogged, her escort dismissed at the door, as though she wished to slip into the building unseen. Historians later debated whether this meeting was planned or the product of fate, but Eleanor's diary suggests that she had received a rare manuscript from London, a 14th century theological commentary, and believed Jonathan, a scholar of moral philosophy, might be the only one who could understand its implications. Inside the dim archive room, the reenactment shows them standing on opposite sides of a long wooden table, the manuscript resting between them like a fragile bridge. Their conversation begins formally, but the tension, emotional, spiritual, forbidden, thickens with every sentence. Eleanor speaks of the text's exploration of divine affection and the difference between love that sanctifies and love that endangers the soul. Jonathan, visibly shaken by the parallels to his own turmoil, confesses that he has spent weeks praying for deliverance from the feelings that grip him whenever he is near her. His voice wavers despite his attempts to remain composed. Eleanor's eyes glisten, not with desire, but with a profound, aching empathy, an understanding born from her own internal battle between royal duty and a longing she cannot extinguish. Their fingers never touch, yet the space between their hands burns with unspoken truth. At one point, the manuscript trembles slightly as Eleanor gently pushes it toward him, encouraging him to read a passage on the nature of sacred affection that walks the edge between virtue and ruin. Jonathan's breath catches. He knows the words are not just theological. They are a mirror of their own struggle. The documentary narrator notes that intelligence agents watching the covert surveillance feed interpreted the intensity of their exchange as evidence of a clandestine affair, despite the absence of any physical impropriety. Still, political rivals seized upon the footage, preparing to weaponize it should an opportunity arise. Meanwhile, inside the archive, Jonathan stepped back, as if the air itself had become too heavy to breathe. He whispered that he feared losing his faith, not in God, but in his own ability to follow God's will. Eleanor, trembling, told him that sometimes faith was not about resisting the heart, but understanding why the heart felt drawn to someone with such overwhelming force. Their eyes locked, and though neither moved, the emotional intimacy of that moment would one day be described by investigators as damning as any physical betrayal. As they finally parted, Eleanor whispered a plea for him to be careful, not for her sake, but for his, and Jonathan left the room looking like a man who had glimpsed both salvation and destruction in the same breath. The part ends with the narrator revealing that this brief meeting, captured on a grainy, long-denied tape, became the first piece of evidence leaked to the press months later, igniting a wildfire of accusations and dragging their private, spiritual struggle into the unforgiving arena of public scandal. Part 6 opens with the sound of news radio static, a chilling reminder of how quickly private whispers can become public weapons. The documentary shifts to the newsroom of a major Washington paper in late 1963, where an anonymous envelope, unmarked, untraceable, arrived on an editor's desk. Inside was a single photograph, the grainy still frame from the Smithsonian surveillance footage of Jonathan and Eleanor standing in close proximity, faces tense with emotion. The narrator emphasizes that, although the image showed nothing inappropriate, its ambiguity became its greatest power. What are they hiding? The headline drafts asked. Why would a British royal and an American senator meet without record? Rumors ignited like dry tinder. Meanwhile, the reenactment returns us to Jonathan's home, where he sits at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the newspaper leak as if it were a prophecy fulfilled. His wife enters quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder, unaware of the emotional web consuming him. The guilt that had already been eating at Jonathan turns sharper. heavier, as he realizes that even the appearance of impropriety can destroy lives, reputations, and the fragile trust he had built, both with his family and the public. Across the city, Eleanor receives a coded diplomatic cable warning her that the press has begun circling and the crown expects immediate discretion. She folds the paper slowly, her expression a painful mixture of fear and resolve. In her private diary, she writes that the scandal feels like a punishment for emotions I never allowed myself to act upon, calling it a cruel irony of fate. The documentary then transitions to their first meeting after the leak, a tense, shadowed conversation inside an underground parking garage, arranged through a mutual friend who feared for their safety. The reenactment shows them standing a few feet apart, the dim headlights painting their faces with a stark, emotional vulnerability. Jonathan apologizes, his voice cracking as he says he never meant to endanger her position, her legacy, or her peace. Eleanor shakes her head, insisting that responsibility does not lie with either of them, but with the world that cannot conceive of a bond defined by spiritual longing rather than physical betrayal. Yet she also admits, with tears she tries to hide, that she is terrified. Not of scandal, not of losing her diplomatic role, but of what will happen to Jonathan if accusations continue to escalate. The tension rises as Jonathan steps forward, almost reaching for her hand before stopping himself, his restraint trembling at the edges. He tells her that he has prayed endlessly, asking God why their paths crossed, only to place both their souls at risk. Eleanor whispers that perhaps the true test is not to flee from the feeling, but to confront the painful reality that some forms of love, even unspoken, can reshape the course of nations. Their conversation is interrupted by the approaching echo of security footsteps, and they separate abruptly, Jonathan disappearing into the night while Eleanor is escorted into a black diplomatic car. As Part 6 closes, the narrator reveals that an internal intelligence memo issued the following morning labeled their connection a potential cross-national vulnerability, marking the moment when their private spiritual conflict became an international matter of suspicion, one that would soon spiral far beyond press rumors and into the realm of political weaponry and covert manipulation. Not of scandal, not of losing her diplomatic role, but of what will happen to Jonathan if accusations continue to escalate. The tension rises as Jonathan steps forward, almost reaching for her hand before stopping himself, his restraint trembling at the edges. He tells her that he has prayed endlessly, asking God why their paths crossed, only to place both their souls at risk. Eleanor whispers that perhaps the true test is not to flee from the feeling, but to confront the painful reality that some forms of love, even unspoken, can reshape the course of nations. Their conversation is interrupted by the approaching echo of security footsteps, and they separate abruptly, Jonathan disappearing into the night while Eleanor is escorted into a black diplomatic car. As Part 6 closes, the narrator reveals that an internal intelligence memo issued the following morning labeled their connection a potential cross-national vulnerability, marking the moment when their private spiritual conflict became an international matter of suspicion, one that would soon spiral far beyond press rumors and into the realm of political weaponry and covert manipulation. Not of scandal, not of losing her diplomatic role, but of what will happen to Jonathan if accusations continue to escalate. The tension rises as Jonathan steps forward, almost reaching for her hand before stopping himself, his restraint trembling at the edges. He tells her that he has prayed endlessly, asking God why their paths crossed, only to place both their souls at risk. Eleanor whispers that perhaps the true test is not to flee from the feeling, but to confront the painful reality that some forms of love, even unspoken, can reshape the course of nations. Their conversation is interrupted by the approaching echo of security footsteps, and they separate abruptly, Jonathan disappearing into the night while Eleanor is escorted into a black diplomatic car. As Part 6 closes, the narrator reveals that an internal intelligence memo issued the following morning labeled their connection a potential cross-national vulnerability, marking the moment when their private spiritual conflict became an international matter of suspicion, one that would soon spiral far beyond press rumors and into the realm of political weaponry and covert manipulation. Not of scandal, not of losing her diplomatic role, but of what will happen to Jonathan if accusations continue to escalate. The tension rises as Jonathan steps forward, almost reaching for her hand before stopping himself, his restraint trembling at the edges. He tells her that he has prayed endlessly, asking God why their paths crossed, only to place both their souls at risk. Eleanor whispers that perhaps the true test is not to flee from the feeling, but to confront the painful reality that some forms of love, even unspoken, can reshape the course of nations. Their conversation is interrupted by the approaching echo of security footsteps, and they separate abruptly, Jonathan disappearing into the night while Eleanor is escorted into a black diplomatic car. As Part 6 closes, the narrator reveals that an internal intelligence memo issued the following morning labeled their connection a potential cross-national vulnerability, marking the moment when their private spiritual conflict became an international matter of suspicion, one that would soon spiral far beyond press rumors and into the realm of political weaponry and covert manipulation. They stand before a painting of a martyr saint, its somber hues reflecting their own suffering, while the orchestra's distant melody trembles through the marble hall. Eleanor, dressed in a silver gown that shimmers under the soft lights, speaks first, her voice barely above a whisper, as she tells him that she may be forced to leave Washington. Jonathan's breath falters, and for a moment, he cannot speak. The fear of losing her hits him like a tide he cannot brace against. He tells her that he has prayed for strength, but he cannot pretend her absence would not shatter something inside him. Eleanor's eyes fill with a sorrow so deep it seems to silence the room itself. She confesses that she feels torn between divine obedience and a longing that feels almost spiritual in its intensity, an affection that has never crossed the lines of propriety, yet consumes her thoughts like a quiet flame she cannot extinguish. There is a trembling pause as their emotions hover on the edge of something neither can name, neither can act upon, yet both feel with overwhelming force. Jonathan steps closer, though still maintaining the respectful distance he clings to like a lifeline, and he whispers that perhaps their bond was never meant to be understood by the world, that perhaps it was meant to challenge them, to reveal the fragility of human devotion under the weight of duty. Eleanor nods, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, illuminated by the gallery lights. She tells him that if she leaves, she will carry the memory of his integrity, the integrity that kept their bond pure, even as the world demanded it be twisted into scandal. As the music swells, they part once more, their hands never touching, yet their souls more intertwined than ever. The narrator concludes by revealing that unseen eyes were watching them that night. A high-resolution photograph was taken by a covert operative, capturing the moment Eleanor wiped her tears as Jonathan walked away. That image, more intimate in its emotional truth than any rumor, would soon leak to the press, fueling a new, more devastating wave of scandal that neither prayer nor diplomacy could contain. Part 8 opens with the public fallout from the leaked National Gallery photograph, an image that showed no impropriety, yet carried an emotional intimacy so raw that newspapers framed it as undeniable proof of a forbidden relationship. The documentary presents the front pages one after another, their bold headlines screaming scandal, while the narrator explains how emotional truth, even without physical betrayal, can be twisted into political ammunition. Jonathan Hale wakes to a storm of reporters outside his home, their camera flashes lighting up the pre-dawn darkness like cold explosions. His wife watches the coverage in silence, her eyes clouded with fear and confusion, and Jonathan, overwhelmed with guilt, apologizes repeatedly even though he has never crossed the moral lines he vowed to uphold. The reenactment shows him sinking into a chair, running his hands over his face as the weight of public condemnation crushes the fragile balance he has tried to maintain between faith, family, and the powerful, inexplicable pull toward Eleanor. Across the city, Eleanor faces her own hell as British advisors descend upon the embassy, demanding explanations she cannot give without betraying her heart. She stands before a panel of stern officials who interrogate her as though her emotions were crimes. They press her to admit impropriety, to acknowledge some physical transgression, but Eleanor refuses to lie, knowing that any confession would corrupt the very purity of the bond she has been fighting to honor. Her diary reveals that she felt as though God Himself were asking me to endure humiliation so that the truth of the heart could remain untainted. Meanwhile, Jonathan attends an emergency ethics committee hearing, where his political rivals exploit his vulnerabilities with surgical cruelty. They present the National Gallery photo as though it were evidence of treason, suggesting that Eleanor may have influenced American foreign policy through emotional manipulation. Jonathan's voice, usually unwavering in the Senate chamber, trembles as he defends her integrity, insisting she has done nothing to merit such character assassination. The documentary narrator highlights that this defense, given in a quivering tone, only fueled the fire, convincing skeptics that no man could speak with such passion unless something deeper connected them. That night, Jonathan retreats to St. Augustine's chapel, kneeling before the altar with a desperation he can no longer conceal. His whispered prayers echo through the empty sanctuary, trembling between confession and plea. He asks God why he was given a heart capable of such depth, if its every beat must be punished, why a connection that felt like spiritual kinship must be interpreted as sin by the world. His tears fall silently, and though he begs for strength to sever the bond, the ache in his chest makes clear that love, especially unspoken, unacted love, can be the heaviest form of suffering. At the same moment, Eleanor stands on her balcony at the embassy, the wind pulling at her hair as she reads a letter from London informing her that her recall is now inevitable. Her breath shudders as she realizes she will be forced to leave without a proper goodbye, torn from the one person who has ever seen the truest version of her soul. She closes her eyes, whispering a prayer, asking for God's mercy on Jonathan, fearing that the scandal may destroy his career, his family, and the faith that has always anchored him. In a final twist, the narrator reveals a haunting discovery. A suppressed audio recording from that same night, capturing a conversation between two intelligence officers who admit they manipulated the leaks to provoke a public eruption that would politically weaken Jonathan. The part ends with the chilling realization that their suffering was not merely the product of rumors or moral panic, but the outcome of a deliberate, calculated scheme, one that would soon push their lives into even darker territory, where faith, loyalty, and love would be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Part 9 opens with the quiet devastation of a city preparing to swallow two souls whole. As the documentary shows Washington in the gray, pre-dawn haze of winter, its monuments looming like silent judges over the scandal consuming Jonathan and Eleanor. The narrator explains that the engineered leaks had achieved their intended effect. Jonathan's approval ratings had collapsed, his legislative work was frozen, and whispers of resignation spread through political circles like a plague. His closest allies urged him to distance himself publicly from Eleanor, but Jonathan, torn between survival and truth, refused to condemn her to protect himself. The reenactment cuts to his dimly lit Senate office, where he sits alone amid stacks of hostile letters, some demanding he step down, others accusing him of betraying his faith and country. He clutches his rosary, his eyes red with sleeplessness, whispering prayers into the hollow quiet, pleading for clarity as every avenue before him seems mired in betrayal. Across town, Eleanor receives her final recall notice, stamped with the crown seal, informing her that she must depart Washington within 72 hours. She stands frozen in the embassy hallway as officials bustle around her, preparing documents and travel arrangements. But the world feels distant, muted, as though she is watching her own life collapse from behind a pane of glass. She withdraws into her private suite, collapses onto the edge of her bed, and opens her diary, not to write, but to reread the passages she had written in fear, love, guilt, and hope over the past months. The documentary narrator reads lines written with trembling ink, in which she confesses that Jonathan's presence had awakened a part of her soul she believed long dead, a tenderness she could neither pursue nor extinguish. That evening, Jonathan receives a confidential warning from a sympathetic intelligence officer. An explosive report tying Eleanor to alleged foreign influence will be released to the press within 24 hours. The document is baseless, engineered to force her departure and destroy Jonathan's credibility forever. But its impact will be irreversible. Jonathan feels something inside him break, an anguish so profound it momentarily steals his breath. He storms out of the capital and drives through the freezing rain to the British embassy, desperate for a final moment of honesty, of closure, of anything resembling peace. The reenactment shows him standing at the embassy gates, rainwater streaming down his coat as he begs the guards to let him speak with her. At first they refuse, but Eleanor, hearing the commotion, appears in the marble foyer, her pale face framed by soft curls, her expression a mixture of devastation and longing. She steps outside despite her advisors' protests, meeting him beneath the flickering glow of the entrance lamps. What follows is not a confession, not a declaration, but a breaking, two hearts confronting the reality that their bond, forged in secrecy and sanctified by restraint, has become a weapon in the hands of those who seek power. Eleanor's voice trembles as she tells him she is being recalled and that the Crown intends to use the scandal to discredit him permanently. Jonathan's composure finally shatters. His voice cracks as he begs her forgiveness, not for anything he has done, but for the suffering she must bear because of him. Tears slip down Eleanor's cheeks as she whispers that no apology is needed, that their connection, no matter how misunderstood, was the purest truth of her life. She tells him that his kindness, his faith, his unwavering respect for boundaries others would have crossed, proved that love can be real, even when it is unspoken. Rain falls harder as the two stand inches apart, hands still not touching, restrained by the same moral commitment that has both protected and destroyed them. Eleanor tells him she will pray for him every night, that she hopes God will heal the wounds inflicted by ambition and manipulation. Jonathan, voice-breaking, whispers that losing her feels like losing a part of his own soul, but he refuses to let corruption define their bond. As she is escorted back inside, she turns one last time, her eyes filled with a heartbreak so profound that the camera lingers on it, knowing history would obsess over that final look for decades. The part closes with the narrator revealing a devastating detail discovered in the classified archives. The fabricated intelligence report targeting Eleanor had been authorized by one of Jonathan's political rivals hours before this final meeting, meaning that while the world believed Jonathan had brought ruin upon himself through hidden passion, the truth was far crueler. Their suffering was orchestrated not by forbidden love, but by the calculating hands of men who saw emotional vulnerability as a political opportunity. The night had already surrendered to a cold, trembling silence when Eleanor found herself standing again in the dimly lit corridor of the abandoned West Wing, the place that had become both her sanctuary and her torment. She could still feel the echo of Lord Alistair's presence in the air, as if the very stones retained the warmth of his forbidden nearness. Yet beneath that warmth, another force pressed against her conscience, a stern reminder of her vow, her faith, the moral scaffolding she had built her life upon. But desire, she realized, was a quiet architect too, reshaping everything she thought unshakable. As she moved deeper inside, the shadows stretched and curved as though beckoning her, whispering of secrets she had tried to bury. The intense gaze he held her with, the trembling breath she felt when his hand had hovered, just hovered, over hers earlier that evening, and the way her heart had pounded with a ferocity that felt dangerously close to surrender. "Strength," she whispered to herself, though the word now felt like something fragile, barely surviving beneath the weight of longing. When she reached the old library door, she found it slightly ajar, as though intentionally left for her, and the sight made her pulse thicken. Inside, Alistair stood near the window, moonlight etching a silver path across his face, revealing both the hunger he tried to contain and the sorrow he could not hide. When he finally looked at her, it was not with triumph or arrogance, but with a desperate reverence, as though she was something sacred he had no right to touch. "Eleanor, I cannot keep pretending," he said, his voice low, trembling with an emotion caught between devotion and despair. She felt it then, the painful collision of two worlds inside her, the world where she belonged, built from discipline, purity, and obedience, and the other, the forbidden world Alistair's presence opened, a world pulsing with yearning, danger, and a tenderness she had never known. "This is wrong," she whispered, though even as she spoke, her body betrayed her with a slight, involuntary step toward him. "Then tell me to leave," he answered. "Tell me to forget the way my soul recognizes yours." His words, too intimate, too raw, broke something inside her defenses. Her breath caught, her knees weakened, yet she forced herself to remember the teaching she had lived by. That temptation was a test. That desire could corrupt even the pure of heart. But what, she wondered, if the test was not about resisting love, but understanding it? What if desire was not corruption, but a mirror, reflecting truth she had been too afraid to see? Alistair moved closer, not touching her, not daring, but his nearness wrapped around her like a confession. "I would rather be damned for loving you," he murmured, "than saved for denying you." His words sent a tremor through her chest, igniting something fierce, luminous, and terrifying. She closed her eyes, torn between the heat rising inside her and the cold chain of duty pulling her back. "If I choose you," she whispered, "I risk everything I've built my life upon." "And if you don't," he answered, voice cracking, "you risk the life you were meant to feel." Tears stung her, not of fear, but of recognition, because she knew he spoke a truth she no longer had the strength to ignore. And as the moon carved their silhouettes into the floor, Eleanor felt the final thread of denial loosen, leaving only the painful, beautiful truth of her own heart. She stood trembling between devotion and desire, faith and longing, knowing that whichever path she chose would mark her forever,